So we were talking about the first transformation, and some of the rationales that were used that were imported to support that transformation.
As I said, there's three major deviations. And transformation, we're talking about change. We're not talking about making something a little better, but not changing. We're talking about big change. And change means the authority is lost. It's a different line when it's changed. It's a different line. It's not the same line. And similarly, we're seeing that now. So many very difficult to comprehend ideas that would have never had any credence whatsoever while Prabhupada was here. So many different ways and processes, so many different conceptions about who is what and what is who. These would have never been tolerated while His Divine Grace was here, any of them. But this is the downline. When the movement gets dumbed down, you get just one deviation after another. You make one mistake. In order to cover it, you make two more. In order to cover those two, you make four more. And it just goes on and on and on, devolution. The first transformation took place. The seeds of the first transformation were already starting to become actuated while Prabhupada was still here. But it became a complete colossal hoax in March of 1978. That was the first transformation. That was the first big deviation, namely the fabricated so-called ISKCON. Then the next major deviation was that this deviation had inequities in it. It had wrong teachings. It had exploitation. Eligibility, adhikar. These men were not eligible to be worshipped as Mahabhagavats. They weren't even eligible to be respected as gurus on the most fundamental of planes. But they were taking opulent worship as if they were Mahabhagavats in Nikunjayuna Ratkeli Siddhi. So, as if they had actuated their Siddhadeya. So this is naturally going to produce all kinds of negative repercussions. Envy will be one of them. Faithlessness will be another. Challenge will be another. But since a quote-unquote higher authority was consulted in order to provide a good amount of the soil necessary for these 11 weeds to sprout, then the authority was again consulted that they're not doing it right. And so now we had, in 1980, the beginning of what I call the Neo-Gaudiya Math, which is the second deviation. Neo-Gaudiya Math, I use the term Neo because it's not the Gaudiya Math in the true sense of the term, but it's very much like the Gaudiya Math. If one says, well, Prabhupada was a member of the Gaudiya Math, for a while he was, but if one says that Prabhupada's preaching mission was non-different from the Gaudiya Math, we must protest and say no. Even in the 1950s, when he formed his ashram in Jhansi, India, he called it League of Devotees. He didn't call it Gaudiya Math, and it wasn't recognized by the Gaudiya Math even then. And when he came to America, he didn't call his society Gaudiya Math. And we could quote letter after letter after letter, and some room conversations also, in relation to Prabhupada's view of the Gaudiya Math, which was not very laudatory. Now, the Neo-Gaudiya Math means that Prabhupada's disciples who are initiated by him go and adopt Gaudiya Math philosophy, Gaudiya Math process, and most importantly, worst, Gaudiya Math vision of Prabhupada, Gaudiya Math vision of how to spread the movement. All of these Gaudiya Math ways which Prabhupada was not in harmony with, which Prabhupada as the Sampradaya Acharya, as the Shaktivesh avatar, who was empowered with the Bhakti Shakti, did not say had any value. In fact, in the letter of 1974, April, to one of his governing body commissioners, he said very clearly that they're very competent to harm our natural progress in Krishna consciousness. And in 1970, he referred to them obliquely as the Great Sinister Movement. So we could just go on and on with that. The fact of the matter is that Prabhupada did not represent the Gaudiya Math. He wanted very little to do with it. He had very little interaction with it. Srila Prabhupada was directly Sakshat Hari. When he spoke, it was Paramatma, it was Krishna speaking. Whatever he said was to be done is what Krishna wanted. And he said differently from Gaudiya Math ways. So when Prabhupada's initiated disciples who had some influence and some power in the movement then went back to the higher authority to complain about the 11 so-called Mahabhagavats, who are actually all pretenders and Sahajiyas, full-blown Sahajiyas, then when they went back, then they'd become converted to the Gaudiya Math way, which was an entirely different way of viewing His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, viewing how to spread Krishna consciousness, the process, and the Siddhanta also had differences. So that's why I use this term Neo-Gaudiya Math, because it's new. It constitutes disciples who were initiated by Prabhupada who, for all practical purposes, gave up their connection with Srila Prabhupada to adopt connection with Gaudiya Math ways. And in some cases even took, quote-unquote, reinitiation from a Gaudiya Math Acharya, or took sannyas from a Gaudiya Math Acharya, or things of this nature. This was the second transformation, but it wasn't a transformation of the fabricated so-called ISKCON, which has already undergone the first transformation. There was a schism. ISKCON, quote-unquote ISKCON, schismed with the Neo-Gaudiya Math in 1982.
So wouldn't you agree that the zonal acharya deviation was resolved when they kind of reformed it? There was a reformation in the mid-80s, I think.
It was a dishonest resolution on a pragmatic, materially pragmatic, utilitarian plane that has nothing to do with spiritual truth. It was technically resolved in that they eliminated the zones and dropped the pretension, the profile of being Mahabhagavat. But the deviations were so egregious. The anarthas, the institutional anarthas and the personal anarthas, were so severe that the real necessity was not met. The real necessity was to return to square one. Where did all these deviations start off from? What is the honest position now? Let us get back to the honest position. There'll be a lot of pain involved in that, but it's going to be more painful if we keep going on with the dishonesty. None of this was confronted on a deep level. Second echelon and third echelon men saw an opportunity to themselves become gurus at this more benign level with a little bit less pretension to it. So they jumped at the opportunity and made a compromise that, yes, we'll still recognize that this whole time you've been guru. This is not right. Of course, there was one minor expansion previous to this, where the 11 expanded to 14. But that didn't resolve anything. That was due to political pressure. So the mid-80s confrontation with the zonal acharyas simply dumbed down the deviation and disguised it a little better.